Good morning, everybody. Thanks for watching. So, I'm going to touch on a subject that I've touched on before, um, and that's the death of Jesus Christ and the fact that he actually died and did not exist for 3 days and was resurrected by God Himself. As many people continue to say that it's just Jesus' body that died, but it's not. And we'll see that Jesus had to die and not exist in order to save all of creation from that very death. Now, I'm starting in Genesis chapter 1, verse 24, just because I had a conversation about a guy who was very upset that his dog had died. Um, and he said, oh, his mom said, well, dogs don't have souls. Well, dogs don't have souls. No animal has souls, as if it's something separate from them, just like human beings. We don't have a soul that's separate from us, that's infused into a body like those that believe in the immortality of the soul do. Remember, the immortality of the soul living on after death, is a pagan lie, and you can research that to see its origins. It's not in Scripture at all. Death is death. It's not life somewhere else. But in 124 of Genesis, Elohim said, let the earth bring forth the living soul, and according to its kind, domestic beasts, creepers, and land animals. All of these animals have become living souls. They are living souls. They don't have a soul. A soul is the combination of body and spirit. So body and spirit put together equal a soul. Yes, animals have spirit because they're alive. You have to have spirit, God's spirit, in order to be alive. That's what life is. So God gives a body a spirit, and when that spirit combines with the body, it becomes a living soul. And that's proven again in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, where we look at Adam's creation. It says, Yahweh Elohim formed the human out of the soil from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living soul. Okay, so again, God didn't take a soul and infuse it into a body and then take the soul out and the soul always lives. That's not what's being done here. God formed Adam from the ground, and he was a dead body. Had no consciousness, no thought, no nothing. Was not alive. He was just a body. Okay, and then God blew spirit. God has spirit. Everything that lives has God's spirit. God put spirit in Adam, and when that spirit combined with the dead body, Adam became a living soul. If God at that moment would have taken the spirit away from Adam, he would have put it back in him, into God himself where it came from, Adam would have been a dead body again. That's just the bottom line. So consciousness, the spirit never dies in the sense that it goes back to God, but when the spirit goes back to God, when we die, we're unconscious. We don't exist anymore. The spirit is back with God where it came from. So God created Adam, blew spirit into him, and combined with the body that he formed, Adam became a living soul. Then if we look at chapter 3, verse 19, after everything happened in the garden, after Adam sinned, what did God say to Adam? He said, for soil you are, that's where God formed him, and to soil you shall return. So that's the definition of death. To die, you will be dying. The end state, death, is exactly like Adam was in creation. He was a dead body created from the soil. So when we die, what God is saying here is that Adam goes back to the soil where he came from. And where does the spirit go? The spirit doesn't live on. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7. It explains it word for word. For soil returns to the earth, like God says will happen to Adam in Genesis 3:19. For soil returns to the earth, and the spirit goes where? It lives on forever? It goes to heaven or it goes to hell? No. The spirit returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastes 12:7. Soil returns to the earth, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Just like creation, how God blew spirit in Adam, combined with the body that he formed, became a living soul. So when we die, we go back to the soil, dead, lifeless body, no consciousness, no existence, and the spirit goes back to God. So when Jesus came, he came in the likeness of Adam. And in order to overcome the curse, he has to participate in what Adam's destiny is, which is death. And death was just explained in these scriptures. So Jesus didn't go anywhere else when he died, as some people want to say in 1 Peter 3:19, I think it is. What 1 Peter 3:19 says is that Jesus was died, he died in the flesh, and he was vivified in the spirit. And then he went wherever he went to talk to spirits in prison, if he did that. Or it's just what he did, his death and resurrection, which that act heralds to those spirits in prison. But when he died, he didn't go anywhere because he had to do what death was with Adam. What did Jesus say on the cross in Luke 23:46? He says, "Into thy hands," when he's dying, he says, "Into thy hands I am committing my spirit." And then he dies. So he commits his spirit to God, just like it's talked about in Genesis and Ecclesiastes, that the body dies and the spirit goes back to God where it came from. The body is unconscious, and the being, the soul, does not exist anymore, because the soul can only exist when it's combined with the body and God's spirit. And yes, Jesus had more of God's spirit than every creature that ever walked the face of this earth, obviously, but that spirit still went back to God. And when it did, Jesus did not exist. He was unconscious. He came like the ground. He went back to the ground in which he was formed. And his spirit went to God. He was dead, gone, didn't exist, just like us, just like Adam, just like he was before creation. And when God resurrected Jesus, he put his spirit back into his body, and Jesus' consciousness and his existence returned. And you see, that's what we participate in. That's what we participate in. If you look at Colossians chapter, this is chapter 2, verses 12 through 13. Being entombed together, this is us, with him in baptism. That's what baptism is. Baptism is identification. It's not sprinkling water on us or doing any of that crap. It's identification with what Jesus Christ did. Being entombed together with him in baptism, in whom you were roused together also through faith in the operation of God, who rouses him from among the dead, you also being dead to the offenses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. He vivifies us together jointly with him, dealing graciously with all our offenses. Okay, so we are baptized into Jesus Christ. We identify with his death, his entombment, and his resurrection, his vivification, him being made alive beyond the touch of death. That's what we participate in. See, it's identification. So Jesus Christ was righteous because of his faith, because he died, he was dead, and resurrected. We participate in that with Jesus. That is why we get the righteousness of God. That is why we have grace. That is why we have everything that we have. That's why we walk the way we walk, because we're given the righteousness, because we participated with Christ in what he did. And what he did was he died and then was resurrected. We participate in both. And when he died, all of that sin and everything we are, that humanity, died with him. And so do we. And on the resurrection, all that sin, our sin, the sin of the world, everything remained in that tomb. and we're resurrected into a new creation. So we identify with that. We participate in that. We never participated in Jesus Christ going to the spirits in prison, or his soul supposedly going anywhere else. If Jesus' soul went somewhere else at death, then we can't identify with him. We're not baptized with him because we can't share in that, because we didn't go anywhere with Jesus. We didn't preach to spirits in prison. We can't identify that with that. We only identify with his death, entombment, and his resurrection for sin. And that's what he came to do. There's no mention of eternal hell or a spirit living on after death anywhere in the Old Testament. 1 Peter 3:19 used to be a difficult verse for me, but it's not anymore. It's Christ being vivified in spirit before he went anywhere. So even if he did, and I still contend that 1 Peter 3:19 is the act of dying and being resurrected that proclaims and heralds to all of creation that Jesus will be above them and is above them. But even if he did go preach to spirits in prison, he did it after he is vivified in spirit. So between death and resurrection, in that death state, he went nowhere. He was dead. And that's what we identify with. That's what Genesis talks about, what death is, where the body is lifeless, goes back to the ground, and the spirit goes back to God where it came from. In that state, you know nothing. No time passes. You don't go anywhere. You can't do anything. Ecclesiastes 9:5. The dead know nothing. Our curse is being in that state, the death state. And the question asked in Job 14:14 is, if a man dies, will he live again? Will he live again? Not will his soul that's somewhere else floating around be transferred back to his body or infused in his body, because that's not what a soul is. A soul is a combination of body and God's spirit, and that equals a living soul. When those are separated, there is no soul. It doesn't exist anymore. The spirit is back with God. The body is dead. If you look at 1 Timothy 6:12, it says, who alone, this is talking about Jesus Christ, who alone has immortality, making his home and light inaccessible, whom not one of mankind perceived nor can be perceiving. This is in Timothy. So there were believers in Jesus Christ who have died already. And people who want to say at death that your soul goes to heaven or hell, so it's not really death, it's just life somewhere else. They're saying that that soul is with Jesus in heaven. But this says in 1 Timothy 6:16, remember when this was written, many people who believed in Jesus Christ have already died. And this is after Jesus' death and resurrection. But it says, who alone, Jesus, has immortality, making his home and light inaccessible, whom not one of mankind perceived nor can be perceiving. So there's no way that anyone has entered heaven yet, because Jesus alone has entered it, and it's talked about here in Timothy in a time when many believers have already died and would be in heaven if that was true. But they're not, because only Jesus is there. And if you look at 1 Corinthians 15:23, yet each in his own class, the first fruit Christ, thereupon those who are Christ in his presence. That's when he comes for us. That's when we're vivified. We're not vivified yet. We have to put on immortality, as Paul says. So the soul is not alive. Jesus Christ's soul did not go anywhere in death. He was dead, gone, facing the existence that faces Adam and faces us because of what was done in the garden, which is the body going to the ground and the spirit going back to God. Spirit can never die in the sense that it comes from God, and God's spirit can never die. It just goes back to him. And when it goes back to him, the body dies and the soul no longer exists. And that's our curse. And Jesus came to enter into that separation, the body being dead, the spirit going back to God, not existing, just like happened to Adam, just like happens to us. And because God did that through Jesus Christ, we will all put on immortality one day, each in our own order. Jesus is the only one there now. All those that are dead until the resurrection day. And that's the glorious completion of the death, entombment, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that we identify with now, and one day will touch every man, woman, and child that ever walked the face of this earth. Every creature, every dog as well.